Hi, my name is Greg Johnson, and I'm the lead pastor here at Restoration Church Wood Forest. At Restoration, our mission is to help people encounter, embrace, and embody the way of Jesus. And so that takes place in a lot of ways around here. But on Sunday mornings, people encounter Jesus through passionate worship and through the opening of God's Word as we explore both the truth of His Word and how to apply it to our lives. And so we hope you enjoy this podcast today. We would never want this to replace church. We merely want it to be a supplement to your relationship with Jesus. But if you're in the area, we would love for you to hang out with us any Sunday morning. Our services are at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. Welcome to Restoration. Matthew chapter 20, we're going to finish it up today. So if you have your Bibles, turn there. The end of chapter 20, it's a pretty straightforward passage at the end of this chapter. Two blind men asking Jesus for their sight, and He heals them. And so as I was preparing this week, I found myself thinking about what it's like to be blind. And so, when we think about that, I remember I was a freshman. I was going to freshman orientation at University of North Texas. So it was like this 2-day event, and you get to go and stay in a dorm, my first time to be away from home. I'm feeling like a man. And they did this orientation. They're telling you about what it's like to be a college student. And then there was some kind of dance or something, and they had some pizza. And so I didn't get to choose my roommate, but we got joined together. And so the guy that was in my room with me was blind. And I'd never hung around with a blind guy before. Not that it was all that different, he just couldn't see. But we were going back to our dorm, and there was a bunch of leftover pizza. And so he grabbed a pizza box, shoved a bunch of pizza in there, and we went back to the room. And so we got back to the room, and he set the pizza box down, and we were both sitting on our bunks and just talking for a while. I was finding out where he was from. I don't even remember his name. But after a while, I said, all right, man, I'm going to go to bed. And I turned out the lights, and it got quiet for a second. And then I heard he opened the pizza box and started eating. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, bro. Do you want me to turn the light back on? And he said, no, I'm good. And I'm like, oh, because you're blind. And he said, right. And then I didn't know what to say after that. So I just laid there and quietly heard him eating pizza for the next 20 minutes. It was a weird moment for me, a typical Tuesday for him. But according to the CDC, approximately 1 million Americans are legally blind. But when we expand that to visual impairment in adults 18 and over, that number jumps to 51.9 million people whose sight is visually impaired in some way. I've worn glasses since 2014. I was in a small group one night, and literally overnight, I was looking at my Bible, and I'm like, oh man, what's wrong? I thought like I'm having a stroke or something, and somebody handed me their readers and said, here, use these. And I was like, oh dear God, I need glasses. And it was such a shock to me because I boasted 20/20 vision for a long time. And so I ordered glasses. My frames came in, this is no lie, on Halloween. And so they were dark rimmed glasses, and I was wearing them, and I was sitting out on the driveway. We were handing out candy, and this lady walked by, and she had like fake blood all over her, like she was a zombie. And she walked by, I'm like, oh, you're a zombie. And she was like, oh, you're the guy from Up. And it was really funny. And so I can see relatively well without my glasses. But I started thinking, have you ever seen someone that's blind to the truth? It's really obvious to you what's going on in their lives, but they can't see it. I do a fair amount of counseling, and just this last week, I had a couple of counseling sessions where we're in a conversation and they're telling me about something, and then I said, oh, it sounds like this, and they're like, oh my gosh, I think you're right. And to me, it was fairly obvious, but for them, it was a new revelation. Because can we just be honest? We're really good at blinding ourselves from the truth. Man, self-deception is the worst deception, but it happens all the time. It's the human condition. And I can think about, man, for years as a professional Christian, I lived blinded to the truth. It was right in front of me, but it took my life falling apart to recognize that there was something more. And so we talk all the time about being broken. A few weeks ago, I had you say it out loud. I am broken. Do y'all remember that? Got some pushback from people. They're like, hey, I don't like saying that. And I'm like, well, the truth hurts, right? Blinded to the truth that we're all broken. And we can hear Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And intellectually, we know, if you've grown up in church, that we're all infected with this thing called sin. But we're blind to the truth that only Jesus can repair that brokenness. You know how I know that? Because I know me, and I hang out with some of you, and so I know you, and I know that in our own way, we are constantly trying to fix our own brokenness, right? That we're trying to put it together, we're trying to figure it out. We've even formalized in the American church this idea that I pray a prayer so that I don't go to hell when I die, but I go to heaven. But then I'm just spending all of my time trying to manage my sin, try to work it out on my own. And I'm blinded so often to the truth that only Jesus can repair my brokenness. And so since chapter 18, we see a lot of blindness. The disciples are blind to what greatness in the kingdom looks like. They're blind to what forgiveness looks like. The Pharisees are blind to what a healthy marriage looks like. The rich young ruler was blind to what true wealth looks like. The workers in the vineyard, the ones that were hired early, were blind to what true generosity looks like. Last week, James and John's mom was blind to what brings status in the kingdom. And today, I want us to look at not just a physical blindness, but spiritual blindness, and take self-assessment. How do you really see Jesus? And if you're face-to-face with him, what do you want Jesus to do for you? That's the ultimate question today. What do you want for Jesus to do for you? So Matthew chapter 20, starting in verse 29, I'm just going to read through this passage. It's just 5 verses. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. So it seems like kind of a nondescript passage, right? Seems fairly obvious that blind people calling out to Jesus, there's something that they wanted. And when he said, "What do you want me to do?" "I want to see." He touches them, they receive their sight. But I want us to dig a little deeper today and see if maybe there is maybe something more that we can find ourselves in the story. So the first thing I noticed is that this mirrors almost exactly the account in Matthew 9:27. If you look back in Matthew 9:27, Jesus went on from there. 2 blind men followed him, calling out what? "Have mercy on us, Son of David." They say the exact same thing. 2 blind guys asking the same question. "Son of David, will you have mercy on us?" This is an acknowledgement that they believe Jesus to be the Messiah, That whole phrase, son of David. It was believed that the Messiah was going to come from the line of David, and so that the Messiah, the anointed one to come and save Israel, was going to be another David, another in the line of King David. Remember Matthew, he's writing to a very Jewish audience all the way back at the very first verse of chapter 1. Remember, it starts out, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So he's wanting to point out at the very beginning of the book that this is the long-awaited Messiah. And then he spends the first 18 verses of chapter 1 walking us through this genealogy, wanting us to see very clearly that this is the one that they were waiting for. The other thing that's good to note is that they were crying out for what? Mercy. They were crying out for mercy. They heard that Jesus was passing by, and they were desperate for what only he could do. They weren't asking for Jesus to do something for them out of anger, like he owed them something, or deal making a promise to follow him if he met their need. They simply cried out in desperation for a touch from the only one they believed could give them sight. So spiritually speaking, if you're willing to live with the eyes of Jesus, he will show you people living in spiritual blindness. And through their pain, they're crying out in mercy every day. Do you realize that? Do you realize that if you're willing to ask the Lord to give you eyes for the world, that people are crying out all around you every day? And we see it in the way that people act out. We see it in the way that people medicate. And people medicate in so many different ways, right? They're medicating with alcohol and drugs. They're medicating through physical intimacy. They're medicating through all kinds. They're medicating through fits of rage and anger. All these forms of escapism are literally people crying out. Do you recognize that? Because we see it so many times as a problem, but they're really just symptoms of something deeper that's going on in their heart. 2023, the CDC did a mental health study among high school students and found that almost 40% experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. That's 4 out of 10. Sadness, hopelessness. Does that ring true to you? That we have this whole generation that is really, really sad, is feeling hopeless, feeling like things are moving in the wrong direction. 28.5% reported poor mental health, 20.4% seriously thought about committing suicide, 9.5%, almost 10% actually attempted suicide. So this is just one segment of our American culture, and the hopelessness seems to be growing, not shrinking. It seems like we live in a hopeless time. But here's the good news. At the same time, there is a resurgence in the US among Gen Z of spirituality, a 15% spike in spiritual hunger since 2019, with young people embracing the way of Jesus at a much higher rate. There's much talk of awakening among younger generations, but it's clear to see what's driving it. Desperation. Do you see it? When you get desperate enough, when you feel hopeless enough, you're beginning to consider other options. And I would say that the reason that we don't see among the older generations, that we don't see this move, is because we're just not desperate enough. We live in an upperly mobile culture that we have all of the trappings of the world. We have everything, and we think whatever we need, we can buy. And we're just not desperate enough. And that's why we don't see Jesus advancing in the older generations. The younger generations, however, have gotten to the end of themselves. They're seeing this incredible brokenness in the world and where boomers and busters and Gen X tend to kind of hide our eyes and pretend like everything's okay. They're looking at the reality. The world's broken. And they don't see a lot of hope here. And so they're beginning to look for hope here. And it's bringing awakening. I believe that there's a possibility over the next 20 years that we will see major awakening in the US, and it's gonna start with Gen Z. And so why is that important? It means we need to be feeding it. We need to be feeding it. We need to start listening to their voices. We need to start allowing their voice to be heard. And maybe we can be led by a group of people that are no longer accepting the status quo, believing for something greater. And know this, Gen Z, they get a bad rap. They've earned some of it. I live with some. I mean, sometimes there's just a disconnect, right? That sometimes there's just such they want this experience and so jumping from thing to thing, trying to find this thing to bring them life. And so I get that, but at the end of the day, they are longing for something more. And so when we talk about this whole idea, remember in Acts 2 when Peter quotes Joel 2 when he's talking about, the old and the young ministering to each other. Man, older generation, I'm 58. How many are in their 50s in the room? You don't gotta be shy, keep them up. People in their 60s, join us. People in their 70s, join us. People in their 80s, join us. Come on, John. People in their 90s. Anybody? Anybody in their hundreds? That'd be cool. But look all over the room. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Guys, this is the generation that needs to be mentoring the younger generation. And here's the problem. We're mentoring them in the wrong things. We're mentoring them to, hey, be quiet, calm down. And they're crying out for something that is alive. And so I would say, man, my generation and up, we need to wake up. We need to start experiencing the way of Jesus in a powerful way, in a way that's tangible. And man, I'm a little biased, but I think comparatively, we do this pretty good as a church, but we got a lot of growing to do. Let's not be satisfied. Let's not be satisfied with snapshots. We want to see the sustained presence of God. We got to get desperate. Desperation caused these guys to cry out. But look at verse 31. The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet. What? Think about that. Can you imagine the scene? Now, Jesus is passing by, and so there's already a great crowd following him, but word has clearly gotten out that Jesus is passing by. So can you imagine the streets lined? So next week, we're gonna see the streets lined in Jerusalem as he rides into town and is hailed, Hosanna, the king is coming. So just know as he's moving toward Jerusalem now, moving toward his death, crowds are gathering. Crowds are following, there are crowds on the street. And it says that as the crowds have gathered, these two guys are crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. And it says the crowds rebuked him and told him to be quiet. How jacked up is that? So why would they tell them to be quiet? I'm not sure. It's kind of a weird thought, but in the culture at that time, if you had a physical disability, it was because you had sin in your life. So maybe they're looking at them thinking, hey, sinners, be quiet. Remember John chapter 9, the disciples saw a blind guy and they said, hey, was it his sin or his parents' sin that caused him to be blind? The assumption that it was sin that caused the blindness. And what did Jesus say? Neither. They're blind so the glory of God can be displayed. And then, bam, he can see. But they're telling them to pipe down and be quiet. So I just wonder if this is what happens often when Jesus comes on the scene. People get really selfish. Because people want to be seen, right? I'm sure you do. If Jesus walked in the room right now, what do you think would happen? Everybody would sit up a little straighter, first of all. We'd be freaking out because there's Jesus. But just imagine, there would pretty quickly, when we're convinced that it really is Jesus in the flesh, there's gonna be a clamoring of people to want to get close to him, right? And want to be noticed. We get really selfish when it comes to experiencing Jesus. You know, if we knew that Jesus was gonna come in and heal one person in the room, who wants to be first in line? Yeah, everybody. Dave Shannon raised his hand. I dare you to try to get in front of Dave Shannon. Yeah, I mean, we all want Jesus's attention. And so maybe that's part of the reason that you're telling them to be quiet, because they wanted something for themselves. They wanted him to notice them and meet their needs. And so I guess the question becomes, who's actually blind in this story? So when you look back in Matthew chapter 9, verses 12 and 13, Jesus says it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. He came for the sick, not the healthy, and the church should be a hospital for sick people. And when Jesus shows up, he draws a crowd. And so we're definitely seeing this at Restoration. If you've been around since the beginning of the year, man, there's been a lot of cool stuff happening. We're on track to baptize another couple hundred people this year. We're seeing people come to faith weekly, including atheists, drug addicts, a self-professed witch, people that are in desperate need of what only God can provide. But know this, when the broken shows up, it gets messy. But here's another thing I want you to know. When you showed up, it got messy because you're broken. I think so often, man, we see people that on the outside, they just wear their brokenness on the outside. And so it's easy for us to look and to judge. And what do we want to say? Hey, sit down and be quiet. That's a pretty real thing, right? But here's what I think we need to recognize. Wood Forest, broken. Just get on the Wood Forest Neighbors page, you'll see it. It's real time. Some of the meanest people I've ever seen or experienced in my life are on that page. If that's you, I'm so sorry, but it's not good. But move outside of Wood Forest, Crown Oaks, Ridge Lake Shores, Grand Harbor, Walden, April Sound. I mean, just look around. We live in a broken world. And just because you're dressed up nice, just because you got your hair did just right, that doesn't make you not broken. All of us have brokenness. And know this, Jesus on the cross, his blood covered all our sin for all time. But it doesn't mean that we don't still have a sin nature. Read Romans 7. Remember Paul? Remember when he's like, hey, the things I don't want to do, I do. The things I want to do, I don't do. What's wrong with me? I'm a mess. What does that mean? It means that Paul, does anybody doubt that Paul was a follower of Jesus? Anybody? Yeah, probably we would call him super Christian, right? And he struggled in his faith. In 2 Corinthians 12, he said, man, I've got this thorn in my flesh. I'm begging God to take it from me. We have no idea what it was. Anybody that tells you that they know what it was is lying to you. Nobody knows what it was. But here's what he said at the end of it. I glory in my weakness, because in my weakness, Christ's strength is perfected. It means that in Christ, it doesn't mean that you are perfect. It just means that you're forgiven. And that you can live in forgiveness, and that Jesus you are in process of being repaired and restored. This side of heaven, we're still gonna have some brokenness in us, but there will be a day in the presence of Jesus when you will no longer need restoration because you will be fully restored. Golf, clap it up. I love it. Maybe you grew up in a church and there's a certain decorum that goes along with it, you know? That you have to come in, you have to act a certain way. And listen, we're not down for chair jumping and all the craziness that can ensue, but know this. Maybe we need to be a little more like David when he was bringing the ark into Jerusalem. And remember, what does his wife say to him? You're embarrassing me. In her own way, she's saying, sit down and be quiet. And he says, I'll get even more undignified than this. So the ones who can't physically see are actually the ones who see Jesus a little more clearly. And the ones who can physically see are the ones trying to silence the ones that desperately need a touch from him. Why are they not pushing him to the front? But at any rate, these men were undeterred. They just cry out louder. Past the crowd, past the Jews. There's a persistence about them. That even though they're trying to be silenced, they're all the more saying, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus rewarded their persistence. Jesus stopped and called them. What do you want me to do for you, he asked. What do you want me to do for you? What an incredible question. Remember, he engaged James and John's mom in a very similar way just a few verses back. In verse 21, she says, hey, can I ask you something? What is it you want? He asked. I mean, Jesus is always asking great questions. And here he's like, what do you want me to do for you? I think it's kind of an odd question to ask a blind guy. I mean, it's kind of like, hey, Captain Obvious, I want to see. Give me my sight. It's not like Jesus doesn't know your need. He wants you to acknowledge your need. He wants you to acknowledge what the deepest need of your life is. And he looks at these men and says, what do you want me to do for you? James and John's request was for status in the kingdom, to sit at his left and right hand. And of course, if you were here last week, Jesus said, you have no idea what you're asking for. And then proceeded to talk about suffering and servanthood. They were talking about status. He was talking about suffering. They were talking about status. He was talking about servanthood. They were life on life with Jesus, but were blind to what they were asking for. And here Jesus is standing in front of two physically blind men and has the audacity to ask them what they want. But I want you to pause and reflect here for just a sec. There is not a person in the room without need. And if Jesus were standing in front of you right now and asked a question, here's my question to you. How would you answer that? Can you just think about that for a second? Jesus is standing face to face with you and looking you in the eye, and he just asks you the simple question, what do you want me to do for you? How would you answer? I'm tempted to have a few of you stand up and tell me, but I won't. Okay, so I just want you to think through it. So here's the truth. Your answer will tell you a lot about what you think about Jesus. A.W. Tozer said, what comes to mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. What you think about when you think about God is the most important thing about you. So my question is, when Jesus comes and looks you in the face and says, what do you want me to do for you? What's your answer? Is it a small answer Are you afraid to go too big because you don't want to feel selfish? Or maybe you're constantly asking for things that you could actually accomplish on your own. And so it makes you feel better about asking it because you're like, well, if I ask it and then it happens, I can say it was Jesus even though I actually accomplished it. Do you find yourself with a little bitty Jesus? You know, if you look around the church right now, the students have put these little tiny Jesus figurines all over the church. Little tiny Jesus. And I think the point is we all need a little bit of Jesus. I think that's the point. But here's the thing. Jesus is so much bigger. His ways are so much higher. His plans for you are so much greater. Why do we dumb Jesus down so much and not believe that he can do great things? Not believe that he can rescue your marriage? Not believe that he can deliver you from the addiction? You don't believe he can actually cure your broken heart? That he can provide you that job? That he can rescue your wayward kid? Sometimes we're afraid to ask too much because maybe we feel a little bit unworthy. Maybe we feel like, well, I hadn't been doing the right things. It would be dumb of me to ask Jesus because he's not going to honor it anyway. What if the thing you're afraid to ask is the very thing that Jesus wants to use to change your life forever? On Thursday night, we were at dinner and the waitress brought our food and I just said, hey, we're about to pray for our food. How can we pray for you? And you know what our answer was? I'm good. All right. Sounds great. And I said, well, we're going to pray for her. And I told her what we were going to pray for. She's like, oh yeah, pray for that. But in her mind, she could not imagine a world where everything wasn't perfect. And I'll guarantee you that if she had been sitting across from me at the table and I asked her 2 questions, she'd probably been crying. Because I'm sure she's got brokenness that she didn't want to tell anybody. She's got to keep it up here. But there are things going on deep inside of her that desperately needs the power of Jesus. So maybe today is the day that he answers your prayer, the day he meets your need. And here's the thing, I don't know the timing of Jesus. Sometimes we ask really big prayers and we don't feel like they're being answered fast enough. And just know this, I'm not God, you're not God. We don't live on that timing. God has perfect timing. And he heals when he heals in the way that he heals. But here's what I do know. They got his attention because of their desperation, crying out to the Messiah, undeterred for his mercy. And then he stopped and he looked. He says, what do you want me to do for you? Verse 33, the obvious, we want our sight. Pretty simple, no spoiler alert. The 2 guys asked for their sight. Very straightforward. What's awesome, that this was in Jesus' wheelhouse. This was a part of his mission. Remember the day early in his ministry when he walked into the synagogue in his hometown in Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19, and he quotes Isaiah 61. Remember he opened up the scroll? The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He's sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. Get this, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Recovery of sight for the blind. Curing blindness, it's what Jesus does. It's in his mission statement. If you look back in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2, one of these great prophecy books, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Isaiah 43, verse 8 in prayer room at 6 a.m. on Mondays, we've been praying through Isaiah 43, and I immediately, in this passage, I started thinking about this verse. Lead out those who have eyes but are blind and have ears but are deaf. Jesus came to heal blindness, physical blindness, spiritual blindness, to shine a light on a new path forward. And remember, he called out spiritual blindness in Matthew 15:14. Leave them. They are blind guides. He's talking about the Pharisees here. And if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. He was saying the Pharisees are blind. The people they're leading are blind. The blind leading the blind. He was saying this is a lost, dark generation, and I am shining a light on it so that I can chart a new path. And so maybe you're here this morning and you recognize that you've been blind to who Jesus really is, that you've been trying to heal yourself. You've tried everything else to medicate your brokenness. And Jesus is standing right in front of you saying, what do you want me to do for you? The simple, most profound answer is, I want to see. I want to see. But maybe more poignantly, I want to see you. You know, we just sang that. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see who? You. Jesus, I want to see you. It's what I read at the end of worship, Ephesians 1:18. I pray that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened, that you may know hope and riches and power. When Jesus recovers your spiritual sight, the first thing you see is him. Because look in verse 34, here's where we land. Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately, they received their sight and did what? And followed him. The first step upon receiving their sight was they followed Jesus. Why? Because he's the first thing they saw. When Jesus is standing in front of you, and he delivers on a promise, your only next act is to follow him. Follow him. He wants you to see him, not just what he can do for you. He is the prize. Look at those guys compared to the rich young ruler. He wanted eternal life. Jesus told him exactly the prescription, and he went away sad. He couldn't follow because he couldn't see that eternal wealth was much more important than what was in front of him. Today, maybe you're at a crossroads. Your way doesn't work and you know it. You're reaching a point of desperation. You want to cry out to Jesus, but something's holding you back. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's unbelief. But if you're willing, Jesus will open your eyes to see him. Jesus looks at you and says, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you? What if today your confession was, I just want to see you. I just want to see you. So I want you to bow your head and close your eyes. Prayer partners are making their way forward, and I want to give you the opportunity to respond. Today, some of you, your eyes are being opened as we speak. You recognize that there is something that you need from Jesus, that you recognize that your way doesn't work. You need a new path forward. Some of you need physical healing. Some of you need emotional healing. Whatever it is, the invitation is clear. Come to Jesus. Today, he wants to look you in the eye and say to you, what do you want me to do for you? He wants you to swing for the fences and ask him for the impossible. He wants to invite you to follow him. Follow him. Be a part of his mission. Be a part of his purpose for his glory.